There's a long history of housing issues in the Black community and low-income communities in general.
We have about half of renting households who are housing cost burdened, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income to their housing costs. It makes families have to choose between their basic needs, like healthcare or education or food.
The state of housing in Baltimore is not a product of a current policy or action. It is a hundreds of years old manifestation of intentional policy.
The Black community isn't the problem. We're a symptom of the problem. But the media portrays us as if we just created all of this all on our own.
Black people are one of the longest kind of historical migrant communities in this country, whether it was the forcible importation of Black people as slaves, to the segregation that happened in the South, to the Great Migration that happened to the North, to the migration of Black folks to the West, or whether it's the way in which communities are now being displaced through gentrification in cities across the country.
So the current state of housing has historic roots based on racism, through redlining, through racial covenants, through the plagues of urban renewal.
Back in the day, redlining was a way that the bank was told not to give Black people a loan.
At the moment that the United States federal government decided to create the Federal Home Loan Corporation, they were essentially creating the middle class. And they excluded specifically Black people and people of color from that.
Redlining destroyed our economy.
It gives you equity, and I think it's borrowing power, and it's an investment, and you would have something to leave to your children.
By impeding Black wealth creation through home ownership, you have essentially shut out the entire race of folks.
So now the new redlining is called gentrification, which means I just build homes that's unaffordable to keep you out of my neighborhood.
Many people are being pushed out to the county where there's a lack of public transportation.
They came in, they sold us a bill of dreams. Well, we're gonna move y'all into the county, y'all have a nice old home, y'all know y'all gonna be living in pie in the sky. But what we found out when we got there was no transportation to bring us back into the city to get to work. The schools out in the county are basically private schools or schools that you had to have a car to get to. So when we got out there, we found that we were lost.
The city decided they were going to engage in a program that would move poor families into some neighborhoods that were better off. And so the plan was to move 10 families into Northeast Baltimore. A meeting was called at Hamilton Middle School, and 800 people were in the auditorium and 500 were outside in opposition to 10 families being moved.
I think people should be able to go and live wherever they choose to live.
But once they come in, they just building condos and what they call affordable housing. Affordable to who?
There are about 150,000 families in Baltimore City that can't pay their rent any given month during the year.
You can build your condos, you can build your townhomes, as long as you build affordable housing along with it, like a mixed community type thing.
Folks deserve affordable housing, okay? How do you build and subsidize housing so that folks can afford to live there?
Developers aren't inherently evil, capital isn't inherently evil. It's how you do that.
There should be no reason that just because you want to come into a situation and improve some stuff, my rent should go up. The stuff that you're trying to improve should have been fixed when I got there.
What they want is that county money. They want to bring that tax money in a tax base into Baltimore City. But the problem with that is when you bring people in, what happens to the people who are already here?
If people start getting scattered, it's just furthering this sort of breaking up of communities.
Our roots run deep, but we are systematically being ripped from the ground in cities all across this country. What we need to do is make sure that people can continue to be connected to the places that they come from.
We have a real lack of affordable housing, coupled with a lack of living wage jobs, which means that a typical market rate housing is out of reach for a lot of people, and public housing exists as a safety net so that people have housing that's subsidized by tax money so that we can make sure people have homes who couldn't otherwise afford them.
They were created for poor black people to be concentrated in one place.
And I don't think it's ever built for anybody to do any better.
This should be a hand up, not this is where you're sentenced to for the rest of your life. And so you have generations living in housing projects, and that shouldn't have been the design.
If you give somebody a voucher for a home, and then you give them food stamps, you didn't put any money in the community. It's just the same cycle of poverty. You know, instead of giving people fish, teaching people to fish.
We're talking people that are living without sometimes window panes, they're living without heat, their doors don't lock, their ceiling has fallen because it's flooded, there's mold, there's gas leaks. And so to survive it is something to be respected within itself.
At one time, the city kept a waiting list of people who had applied for public housing and Section 8. That waiting list was 40,000 families.
We haven't built any new public housing. So we're losing units. We've lost a lot of units in Baltimore, and we continue to lose units because of the lack of funding priority for subsidized housing. I think there's a problem going on in public housing nationally, which is that HUD has been defunded and defunded and defunded by Congress over the last 30 years. It used to have a budget of over $80 billion. Now it has a budget of only about $42 billion.
You can be on a list for Section 8 your whole life. You can go on that list when you turn 18 and you can get a job, a family, you'll still be on the Section 8 list, still haven't gotten to it.
We sign up and get on the list that we were supposed to be placed in housing, but then when your name come up and then they talk to you, you can't get a house because then they tell you that you got a felony or anything on your record.
We've seen it happen everywhere. We don't have funding for health care, but we do have funding to give to a private billionaire developer to build luxury condominiums. We need subsidized housing. We need it more than we need luxury condominiums, but the priority isn't there from our lawmakers.
It kind of makes it hard because you don't have stability. You know, mailing address, certain things that you need, food, and just that support system is very important. Instead of thinking about your next step or progress as a person, you're just thinking about the simple things of how I'm gonna eat, you know, where I'm gonna sleep. So you need that place that you can rest your head or have a hot meal, or even simple things like washing your body. All of those things plays a role in our success as people.
If you take away affordable housing, public housing, those sorts of things, where would people live?
There are somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 homeless people on the streets of Baltimore on any given night.
I had lost my job due to, I think, my mental state that I really couldn't hold a job down. I was standing under the bridge with a tent. They came and took all our tents with a truck, put them on the truck, didn't tell us where they was taking it, didn't give us our belongings back or anything, but left us in a worse condition than we was in the first place.
I had got let go of a job when the politics had changed. It's just real rough to get into a job. And then once you get into the homeless market, your hands get tied because you're caught up all day just trying to keep yourself with clean clothes and something to eat.
I mean, there are people who worked at great government jobs. You know, when they're younger, you're retired from government jobs, 30 years, and were making really great money. But, you know, they end up in an affordable housing, you know, senior building.
It's hard for somebody works all their fucking life and end up with nothing. But in ways, it's made me stronger. Is it wrong for me to want my own place?
For centuries, really, our neighborhoods have been segregated so that we were only allowed to live in one place. And the beautiful piece that came out of that was a lifelong legacy around transfer of home ownership, around institutions that were supported. And as segregation lifted and people moved out of the central cities in particular, we experienced an erosion of the Black infrastructure, the economic infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, the social fabric, so to speak, of our communities.
I don't remember being at school and being taught about home ownership, being taught the steps towards home ownership. They don't even put it in our mind that we can own a home, because most of the people in my neighborhood rent their homes.
Why shouldn't we own where we live? If you add up how much money you pay rent per month, that could be mortgage payments.
People pay more to rent a home in Baltimore than in any other city in the country than to own it. And that, to me, is just racism.
My mother-in-law gave my fiance and I a house on Biddle Street. But the city decided they want to do development in their neighborhood, and they came in and they basically told us to get out. It was like value around $85,000, $90,000, but they only gave us $10,000 to move.
Where you live, for many people in this country, is just about the house that you live in. But actually in communities of color, and particularly for Black folks, it is the way that we build and make community.
Your zip code is the greatest determinant of your life expectancy in the city.
Everybody likes beautiful. If you grow up in a community to where there is very little, that becomes your norm. If you don't get a chance to see anything different, you won't have the ability to expect anything different.
You can be the cleanest person, and if you live in a house next door to a vacant house, or if you live in a house that hasn't been upkept from the last person, or if you live in an apartment building that is just infested with roaches, then there's no way to get out of it. Like, I just don't want to raise my kids around that. It makes me want to cry almost, because it's like, I feel dirty. It's like I don't even want nobody to come over. I don't even want to take my bags nowhere, afraid that a roach might crawl out my bag and you might see it.
It's gonna shape you in some way. As much as you try to be your own person, everybody tries to be their own person. I know for myself, I made a lot of decisions that I shouldn't have made, that I know I made because of the environment I was in. It shapes sometimes your morals, it shapes your ethics.
Your environment that you're born into, it affects your genetics. You know, so they did a study on how long your parents had owned their home, if they'd owned it, and there's a direct correlation to your likeliness to catch a cold virus. Those that live in environments of high stress, high chronic stress, have high chronic disease and high chronic death that's avertible, that is death that should not be.
Having safe, affordable housing that is a place that you can rejuvenate and rest and retreat to is really, really critical for not only mental health and wellness, but just a sense of like accomplishment in this world, right? Like, you know that if you have a home, the people you love will always have a home. And that's the kind of peace of mind that most of us are seeking.
But we know that what we really need to do is be building community power around the issue of housing to impact lawmakers, to impact the way that people think about housing as a human right. The developers could still get the subsidies, but residents, workers, community stakeholders would have a say in what happens to that building, could guarantee permanent affordability through models like community land trusts and shared equity housing.
So we need systems that are actually going to place folks into homes and help them to buy and own them.
You have to teach people how to build their own, create their own, maintain and sustain their own. And I think really that's the only thing that's going to make this work.
I think that the education system should guide young people to learn how to, budget their money, sustain their money, and buy a house.
It has to be a shift in the way we see things, a shift in the way of thinking, a shift to looking at, hey, we could actually improve here. And that's going to be hard because we've been beat down. You can't tell me that we can't run our own communities and run our cities.
We have to fight together to, be successful.
We can have our own stores, and what takes place is the pride of that immediate community begins to be lifted because the people from that community are lifting it, and we're not expecting someone else to come in and do it for us.
Get out there and say, okay, we're not going to take this anymore. this is our neighborhood, this is what we're going to do, this is what we want, and we're going to control what goes on in our neighborhood. And everybody do organizing in their community, then we bring all this community together and we become powerful. We must be able to go down City Hall, we must be willing to go to Annapolis and DC.
Communities got to get from just surviving to thriving.
Young people of color are the majority in so many states, and we will be the majority by 2018. So the question is, will we stand by that majority of young people so that they can build a culture and a community in which their families finally get to thrive so that all of us can thrive? And that's the work that we fight for.